On the bench today. This is another one of my radios. Recently got it. The only reason I really bought this was I wanted the faceplate. I've got, I don't know, I guess I might have enough fingers to count all the of this model radio that I have. So this is a President Adams. This might be my favorite. I'd have to think about that, but it's probably one of my favorite, what I call mid-range AM sideband radios, 40 channel. I say mid-range because there are some, the uber premium radios, CPI, and a few others. But when it comes to the mid-range radios, that have a Uniden Cybernet chassis, shoot, Hitachi. I mean, name the brand. This is probably, when it comes to something with a Uniden chassis in it, this is probably my favorite radio. For starters, it's bigger than a standard radio. Bigger radio would be about, or a normal radio would be about that wide. This one's fat. It's really fat, and it's fat for a reason. It's got some extra switches here, or push buttons. It's got a channel 9, 19, scan, and normal. So the President Adams has the UPD 858 chassis, but I'll show this in a second. But it has another circuit board in here because it added this scan feature. Like I say, I've got a bunch of these, but I got one of these one time as unfortunate, and it's not unfortunate, but I buy parts chassis just wanting them for parts, and they end up being, they either work or they just have something really simple wrong with them, and I get the blasted things fixed, but they're not cosmetically very good looking. And I got one of those. The covers are mint. It must have been in a mobile application and never removed, ever. It just was installed, and the faceplate, though, there's no ink left. All the silk screening, it's just pretty much gone. It is worn through the silver. It's just down to the kind of like cream-colored, plastic on the underside. Yeah, the finger wear on that thing is horrible. So I needed a good faceplate. Figure out, if I get this, pull the faceplate off of it, then I can use this one for a parts chassis. And then I opened it up and looked at it. Man, this one's so nice on the inside. I don't want to use this one for a parts chassis either. Now it had two holes in the top cover. You can see there's two toggle switches dangling around down here. So it does, and I'm not going to do it now. I'll just set this off to the side. I'll get around to doing it one day. But, yeah, I'll restore this one and continue my search for a good faceplate for the other radio that I have that I've already restored. Everything else works fine. I just need a bezel for it. But, yeah, this one internally is in such nice condition, with minor exception of removing all of this junk. Yeah, I'm going to restore this one because it looked like it was worked on way back when. So somebody got this, they did their channel mod to it, whatever nitwit did it. Like I say, they screwed holes in the top in the top cover to put two of the toggle switches, and this thing's got some channels, man. Like I say, it's UPD 858, so yeah, you can get boatload of channels out of one of these PLL chips, but you need a lot of switches. Nowadays we just use a Channel King board. It'll give you every possible frequency or every possible channel you can get that the VCO will reliably lock onto. But back in the day, you either used a rotary switch or lots of just push buttons and toggle switches. Well, they used 4 switches in this one. So there's a toggle switch, here's a toggle switch, and you can see this button here has been relabeled high-low, so they probably stole those stickers out of an actual channel kit. But, yeah, that one's also a channel button. The A&L noise blanker, also a channel modification button. And all of these are disconnected. I'm not really sure why. We'll get into that in a second. But I thought I'd show this radio. So, if you buy a radio like this, now this one actually works. It works just fine. Has great receive, great transmit. Well, I don't want to say great, but it works. It's putting out full output power, and receive is acceptable for a radio that's in original, unrestored condition. So it still has all the original electrolytic capacitors. But let's say you buy something like this. What do? Do you just start using it, or should you do something? Well, honestly, a radio like this, because of age, you honestly should restore it. Do it yourself, send it to somebody else, doesn't matter. But you do want to do some maintenance on these. Now, I've heard people say about, but it's not in the owner's manual or the service manual. There's stuff that needs to be changed on a scheduled basis. Well, no, it's not. But you have to remember, manufacturers that make stuff like this, They don't design these radios to last for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They design them to work for a while. They break, you throw it away. They want you to go buy a new one. They don't want you to, they don't want you to basically repair these things forever. They don't make much money doing that. So, what I consider scheduled maintenance on a radio is anything electronic in this vintage, and honestly, even up till today, because they still use the blasted stuff, is get the corrosive glue out. You'll often hear me say Sony Bond, because that was one of the actual names that was used for some of that glue. But there are lots of companies that made that stuff, and it comes in different flavors. Some of it's kind of like started out life kind of tannish transparent. Some of it's tan but opaque, but they all turn dark brown. They all have the same problem. They get corrosive and conductive. They'll start to short out components, and they will eat the leads off of parts. So you want to get that out, and I'll show that in this radio, and it's starting to do its job inside of this one. That's one of the reasons you want to get it out before it actually damages something. The other thing, electrolytic capacitors. They're going to go bad. They're actually, in something this vintage, they're going bad. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Just by age, they go bad. You pull up a data sheet, go to a capacitor manufacturer's website. They'll have a listed shelf life. Manufacturers don't guarantee those capacitors are going to last past that shelf life. They just physically go bad. It's not like a transistor that will probably, I'm not going to say last forever, because nothing lasts forever, but it'll last for probably generations. But electrolytic capacitors have relatively a short lifespan, 15 to 20 years, and the newer CB radios, they use really cheap caps in them. Shoot, I've seen those things start to go bad in 10 or 12 years. But in the older radios, usually 20 plus years, but they start to go bad. They dry out. In some radios, you'll see them actually start to leak externally. The electrolyte leaks out onto the circuit boards, and in some radios that have double-sided boards, it will then eat the copper traces off of the circuit board. You can watch some of the videos I've done on GE Super Bases, where they've just eaten the radios from the inside out. But that's the kind of maintenance you want to do. Clean your controls and do a transceiver alignment, because all of these components inside this radio, they have a tolerance. Well, that changes with time, okay? Especially components like resistors. It may have started out life if it was a 1K or a 1,000 ohm resistor with a 5% tolerance. So when it started out life, it may have measured, when it was installed in this radio, might have measured 1,020 ohms. So it was within tolerance. But it's been in here for 30 years. And it can change, it'll vary, especially older stuff if it has carbon composition resistors. Those things just go bad. They're like an electrolytic capacitor. Carbon composition resistors will go bad just sitting on a shelf, not using them. They'll can change drastically in value. But as components change and as they age and their actual specification, the measurements of them change over time, that throws your alignment off. So receiver sensitivity can fall, transmit. You can but it's gradual. It happens slowly over a large amount of time. So a lot of times you don't realize it till one day it's kind of like a brick falls out of the sky and you go, why can't I hear what I used to be able to hear on my radio? That's because it's old. It's just like us. It gets old. It needs help. Crystals change. They'll just go bad again. They can just go bad sitting on a shelf. But as crystals age, the quartz, because it's actually quartz, the actual rock mined out of the ground. Now, nowadays, modern crystals are probably man-made, grown in a controlled environment. Back in the day, crystals were cut. Hell, I live in Quartz Alley. Around here used to be within a 50-mile radius of me is where most of the quartz in the United States that was used to make crystals came from this area of the United States. My God, at one point in time, there were probably over 50 crystal manufacturers in my area. But they change, so the frequency changes. Eventually it gets to the point where the adjustments inside the radio, sometimes you can't adjust to bring that crystal back into frequency, so it may need to be replaced. Like I say, normal maintenance. So if you buy something like this, first thing to do, don't plug it in. Never, ever, ever plug anything in electronic, unless you've owned it your whole life and you know what's been done to it. But even then, I suggest just take the covers off and give it a quick once-over and look for possible problems, because you don't want to go letting out the magic smoke. Magic smoke's not a good thing. magic smoke gets expensive. It's not so much that the smoke's expensive, it's expensive putting it back in. So, radio like this. You take the covers off. The first thing we're going to notice on the, you just flip the radio over, on the solder side of the board is, yes, lots of wires. All this will get, and I'm just going to pull this stuff out. Like I said, the radio works, the channel mods work, but I don't want channel mods in this thing. I want this to be a bone stock factory radio, 100% modification free, yeah, possibly with the exception of the clarifier unlocked. But I do see something right off the bat, didn't notice it before, there's a red diode right there. And the Zener Diode is missing there. What did they do? Appears to go back to the power jack. Okay, so yeah, that's a Zener. Well, actually, the power goes to that resistor. Okay, so yeah, you can see, easy to tell this is a Zener Diode probably. It's got, you know, the power wire that you just saw me jiggling there. Comes through a resistor, comes down to this area here. But this diode's in basically what you would consider backwards. You can see the black band goes to a component. The other end goes to ground, goes to the DC board ground. So yeah, it's a Zener diode. That's the way you would normally hook up a Zener diode. So yeah, oh, let me turn my monitor radio down here. So yeah, that's a unique way of doing the clarifier modification. I don't know why they went through all that hassle. Normally you just tie in the voltage regulator over here. Not make your own voltage regulator circuit powered straight off the power jack. But yeah, that'll get done one of these years whenever I redo this radio. But that's, you know, one of those things. Look for stuff that obviously does not look like it's factory soldered in. It doesn't look like it was done, you know, when the radio was assembled. It's probably not original and it's a modification. So yeah, out that's going to go. Yeah, all this is going to get undone. I'll have to pull the PLL out on this one, because the way they did this was they actually bent up a few pins of the PLL, and they've got wires soldered to them, so all of this crap needs to go. But otherwise, the rest of these components, those are normal. These are going to be factory components, the bodge parts on the bottom of the board here, these capacitors, all these other ones, and resistor. Expect to see that. Some radios, oh, you can have a flood of parts on the bottom side. There can be a dozen or two capacitors on the bottom side of the board. But the one thing you really want to take care of is get the glue off of this thing. And because Uniden, when they built these things, they poured this glue on each one of these components that's bodged on the bottom. I guess to keep it from flopping around. Not that I know how a capacitor with little tiny short leads is going to be bouncing around inside of here. But this glue, you can see it's dark. It's not light in color. It's not what I call juicy. It's not rubbery anymore. It's getting hard and brittle, and it's conductive. And you can see it's actually here, I don't know how well this will show up in the camera, but it's actually starting to corrode the solder. So the solder is starting to oxidize because that corrosive glue, and it'll eat the leads off of this capacitor. So, you know, all that stuff's got to go. If the leads are corroded, I'm just going to replace the parts. So, you know, any of these capacitors, if that glue has actually touched it, or these resistors, they're out, and I'll just stick new ones in. I'll clean the glue off, make sure there's no traces of that stuff, clean any corrosion off, and then I'll just put new parts in. There's no need trying to clean. I'll spend more time trying to clean the lead of that resistor off. It's just cheaper to use a new 1-cent resistor. They're cheap parts. Passive parts like that don't cost hardly anything. But otherwise, bottom of the board looks pretty good. I see there's a bodge wire right here. I just lost it. There it is. There's a bodge wire there, so I'll have to look on the top side and see what they did. This is in the audio circuit, so... But that's not the filter circuit. They didn't bodge... There's no bodge wire here. That would be after the audio low-pass filter. Maybe that's might be... Somebody did a different AMC modification, possibly. Now, this circuit board over here is nothing but the scan feature. So that's what makes this radio so wide, is it has an entire extra circuit board that controls the scan feature. Let me just tuck these toggle switches up in here. Another thing, all of these push buttons, absolutely nothing is connected anymore. There are absolutely no wires going to this switchboard. And the two LEDs for the channel 9 and 19, they're just sitting down in there, the leads. Of course, I just shoved the toggle switches in there so you can't see anything. But you can see just the leads just sticking out there. There's no wires attached to the LEDs. So, you know, when I redo this, I will have to completely rewire this board, the switches, the LEDs, and everything. And I don't know why they did that. They didn't use... I could understand if they wanted to use these 4 push-button switches for a channel modification, then they'd need to disconnect all these switches and this board. But they didn't. So why did they do that? They could have left the scan feature active. The channel modification doesn't care if this is in here. All this scan board does is basically intercept it and send different programming to the PLL. As long as you have this switch in the normal position, it's not going to affect it. So yeah, I don't even know why they did that. Other than, just notice, the switches don't ratchet. Well, actually... Oh, that's cute. I like that. If you put the radio in the upright position, these buttons don't ratchet like... And actually, that whole switch assembly's loose. Then again, they probably had it out when they disconnected the wires, but if you put it in, the buttons don't lock in. If you turn the radio upside down, they stay in like they're supposed to. So, yeah, it's just dirty, or I just need to check the connecting arm between all 4 of those switches. But yeah, you can see the whole board wiggles there. Looks like the screws in there, it's just loose. But, you know, bottom side of the board, not bad. Like I say, I got some bodge wiring to remove off of there from when I undo the channel modification. And this board over here. But otherwise, looks good. Hasn't been hacked at really bad. That's the main key. The speaker platform here. Let's see. We had some parts. Okay, there's some diodes lifted up. So yeah, remember that jumper wire somebody had in there? You can see there's 2 diodes. They left them in here. They just desoldered them and pulled them up through the board and then jumpered across. And I'd had to pull the schematic off. Normally people bypass the filter circuit here, but that's not what they did. They put a... Honestly, I'm going to have to look that up. I can't remember what those diodes are for. I think that's part of the AMC. But that's up farther, actually. And that's the thing. When you get a radio, if you see modifications... Of course, I'm just going to put everything back to factory, but you never know what you're going to find. There will be well-published modifications that everybody's familiar with seeing, but don't be surprised if you see oddball stuff like this. You know, this weird way of doing the clarifier unlock. I have no idea why they went through all the hassle of going back to the power jack to pick up a voltage source. Different Zener Diode. I really have no idea what the heck they were thinking. So yeah, all that'll go back to factory. Of course, these 2 switches are not doing what they're supposed to anymore. They're part of the channel modification, so yeah, I'll have to rewire all of this. You can see there's cut-off wires here. So yeah, that's actually, those should be the noise blanker A and L, that brown wire. So yeah, all that would have to get redone. Now, this radio, it's a good example of a radio. Another reason why I like this mobile radio, this board came in it came in several, I don't even want to call them versions. There was the first batch of these things that went out that had all kinds of problems. Unit didn't quickly realize that. They came out with there are a boatload of service bulletins on this chassis, the UPD-858 chassis. When I say that, what I'm talking about, UPD-858, it's the PLL chip that's used in this. But there were a bunch of service bulletins on this. So don't be surprised if you see cut traces, especially back here, some of the voltage regulation circuit and parts bodged on the bottom of the board. That's why you really should pull the service bulletins out to make sure that, you know, if you're removing parts and reconnecting traces, make sure that they weren't supposed to be in there, because it may be a factory service bulletin to correct a flaw. But there were a couple different versions of this that had some of these radios don't have as many parts as this one does. And they suffer from adjacent... Well, I don't want to say they suffer, but their adjacent channel rejection is nowhere as good as it is with this radio. The reason being, you'll look in those radios, that crystal filter, so that's not just a normal crystal. That has actually 3 leads coming out of the bottom of it. That's actually a crystal filter, okay? That crystal filter and that transformer, tunable transformer right here, they're missing. A lot of radios, when you take the covers off of them, you'll just see in between one of the holes for this transformer right here and one of the holes for this crystal filter, you'll see a jumper wire on the top side of the board here. That's it. The parts are missing. It was just, I guess, a cost-cutting way of cutting costs. Crystal filters are expensive, and, you know, transformer cans, so yeah. Don't be surprised if you have a UPD858 chassis. You'll see the footprint on the board. It's silkscreen, where it's supposed to be a crystal filter and a transformer can, and they will not be in there. It's just a piece of wire, and that's it. Now, it's very easy to install these. The problem is, Uniden no longer makes this transformer, so basically your only source for these is a parts chassis. But yeah, if you can just remove that jumper. If you have that transformer and get one of these crystal filters, you can just take the jumper wire out, put that transformer in, put the crystal filter in, and your radio will have it. It's no modifications. It's just a matter of either it's got a crystal filter and a transformer, or it has a piece of wire. So, but the glue, again, there's going to be lots of glue. Anything that has a toroid transformer like this, where you can actually see the windings, they pour glue down over it. Now, that glue doesn't so much hurt these windings of these transformers because they're enamel coated. The problem is where that wire then is, the enamel coating is stripped off and the wire goes through the circuit board. If that glue got on there or any of these other surrounding components, it's going to eat the leads off of it. So usually the easiest way to do that is just unsolder these transformers, pull them out, take out all the parts around where that glue is, get all the glue off, clean stuff up really good. Don't be surprised if you just touch one of these transformers, the wires will break off. That's because that glue, like I say, if it touched the part of the wire where there's no more enamel coating on there, it will have eaten the wire, and it may be hanging on by a thread, you know, as they say. And just touching it, boink, the wire will break off. So no biggie. It's just enamel coated wire. Just count how many wraps or how many turns of wire there are on these coils on the ferrite core, and you can rewind them. It's just make sure you use the same gauge wire, and you can rewind them. It's not that hard. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to do that. But yeah, other than that, it doesn't look bad. All original. The driver final section that hasn't been hot rodded. No other hokey stuff. Like I say, it's mainly channel modifications. The clarifier, a little bit of work over here, and yeah, they really didn't do much else. So that's a good thing for me. It's my radio. But like I say, I always suggest you get something used. Don't ever plug it in. You want to check for wires. That's one of the first things. People will do modifications like this. You know, they cut wires. Now, in the case of these wires right here, yeah, there's really nothing for them that they could possibly short out around in here. And actually, you can see some of the stuff they did. They actually used heat shrink tubing, okay? So, yeah, no possibilities of anything shorting out there. But I see a lot of radios. When people did modifications, they used black tape. Well, black tape that's 30 years old, unless it was really good black tape, I can guarantee you the adhesive on that tape has dried out over the decades, just like happens to your electrolytic capacitors. And the tape, a lot of times, has just fallen off, and it'll be laying inside the radio. So now you've got a bunch of bare wires bouncing around in the radio. So that's another good reason before powering up vintage equipment is to check if it's got modifications. Even if you want to leave the modifications in, just check to make sure that it was done properly. There's no bare wires, because I've seen that too. People will do modifications, they've just got wires, they'll splice it together and have them twisted with their, just twist the wires together with their fingers and don't even solder them. Stuff like this, like I say, this one somebody did at least go through. They did put heat shrink tubing over it, so, good for them. You don't have to worry about that drying up and falling off at some point in time. But yeah, I see a lot of times people use black tape. So, if you see chunks of black tape laying inside your radio, look for bare wires, because it fell off of something. Yeah, so like I say, overall, this one's in pretty good condition. I mean, basically just remove 4 switches for the channel modification, redo, just clarifier mod the way they did it, re-enable whatever they disabled here. So just basically remove that jumper wire off the bottom, put those 2 diodes in. I'll actually got to look at that because I'm not sure what the heck they did there. Like I say, that's in between the low-pass filter and the AMC ALC circuits. I think those... Do those go to ground? No. Actually, no. Those are series diodes, and they go to... Yeah, actually, I think that is. Like I said, I got to pull the schematic out and be sure, but that'll get redone. These radios, these UPD-858 chassis are talkers. You don't need to go clipping parts or doing anything to the AMC ALC circuits on these. They're good sounding radios, so yeah, leave the limiter circuits alone. All that's going to do, if you modify them, it's going to distort your audio, and you're going to cause adjacent channel splatter, and you're probably going to shoot your second harmonics up through the roof, which aren't going to do you any good on channel. But yeah, so here's another radio I thought I'd show you. Just some of the basic things. Get a radio, look it over. Recap it. Like I say, these things are going to go bad. All these electrolytic capacitors, they're well past their expected lifespan, and they're just going to slowly short out internally and cause, like I say, can cause all kinds of weird problems. Audio goes away. Your audio will become distorted, starts to get what I call kind of crunchy or crackling. That's a very good sign you've got electrolytic capacitors going bad to your audio, coming out of your speaker. That quality starts to degrade. And you'll be surprised a lot of times. You do just a recap. Just recap your radio and do an alignment. It is a night and day difference. How well it'll transmit, how well it will receive, how well the audio sounds. Like I say, be surprised just how much havoc these little aluminum cans can cause when they start to go bad. So there you go. There's just another one I thought while I was looking it over, I'd just fire the camera up and show what I look for. Now, like I say, this is my radio. Not going to really do anything to it now. The only thing I'm going to do is I'll just desolder these wires just so I don't have to worry about putting these stupid switches back in the cover. I can just cut all this junk out of here. And in one of these decades, I'll get around to actually restoring this thing. It's not like I need it. Like I say, I've got a bunch of these already. But I'm still on the hunt for a bezel. That's the only thing that does suck. The unobtainium part in most radios is the bezel. That's the one thing. Bezels and knobs, when they go bad, yeah, there's just no replacements. And that's the one thing, usually if they're destroyed, a lot of times the chassis will be good, but yeah, the faceplates, man, they can take a beating. So, in any case, there you go. There's just a quick look at a President Adams, my initial inspection. I'd have to say I'd give this one a thumbs up. Definitely worth restoring. I'm not going to steal the faceplate off of it. Just need some glue removed, recap job, remove all these stupid channel modification here, undo this oddball way they unlock the clarifier, and it needs an alignment, and undo this other modification here. Actually, did they? Yes, they did do that. Now, actually, that's not going to hurt anything. It's one more modification I can show you. They only did one side. That's weird. So this is a double-tune transformer. Actually, just flip it over and show you. So right there's a double-tune transformer. Okay, that's part of your PA section, or your amplifier section. Now, it's a tapped transformer, okay? So, let me get a pointer here. My big meat paw out of the way. Trying to see around the camera here, too. So you've got 1, 2, 3 terminals, and then on the other side, which is, where the heck is this thing here? 1, 2, 3, yeah. So there's 1, 2, 3. But you can see this one's unused. And then the same thing on the output side of it. This one was unused. You can see someone has cut the trace right here. That's what that tan line is. Somebody actually cut the trace to disconnect this where it was tapped, and they went to the outside winding. That's actually very common, and you're not hurting anything. The reason people do this is when you broadband a radio, you add lots of extra channels. What you will find is, now, the radio factory and the factory configuration, you don't need to do that. you gain no benefit. If anything, it may actually reduce power a tiny bit. But when you go broadbanding, the problem is it can only broadband so far, and then your output power starts to drop off. It's the same thing with receiver sensitivity. You go doing a channel modification, adding hundreds of channels, it only can broadband fairly flat for a certain range, and then the sensitivity will start to drop off at the outside edges. In some radios, and it depends from radio to radio and what transformers were used, sometimes you can do this. What you can do is cut the trace and go to the other tap or the outside, of that winding, and you will increase, so, if it was that wide before, you might be able to broaden out where it's flat a lot farther, and that's why people do that. It's just weird. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do that to this transformer and only do it on one side. Usually when you do it to these radios, you would cut this trace and then run a jumper to this pin here that's not attached, and same thing here. You cut this trace and then you just connect it over to this other one that was not attached. So that's kind of weird why they did that. I'll actually put this back to factory because, like I say, I don't need it broadbanded. It's just going to be a 40-channel radio, so I have no need of that being broadbanded. So that'll go back to factory. But yeah, just one more little thing. So there you go. There's my initial inspection on a President Adams 40-channel AM sideband radio.